name is Michael Albert, and I am the host of the podcast that's titled RevolutionZ. This is our 335th consecutive episode, and our guest is my friend Cynthia Peters. Cynthia is a longtime community activist, editor, and writer from Boston. She has been active in a wide range of movements, including anti-war, housing justice, reproductive justice, and labor. In late fall of 2024, she started working with other conveners to put together a searchable database of grassroots organizations so that people mobilized by the current political situation will have an easy way to find an organization to connect with. It's called the All of Us Directory. Cynthia is a serious student of Aikido, partly because it's a beautiful martial art, and partly because it helps her think about effective ways to respond to the attacks of capitalism, white supremacy, and the heteropatriarchy. I should acknowledge I have known and been close friends with Cynthia for a long, long time, and I was also one of, and am still a convener of the All of Us directory. So first, Cynthia, what is this directory idea that you and some others have been together pursuing?
Okay, the All of Us directory. Yeah, thanks a lot for giving me a chance to talk about it. And thanks for having me on the show. And I think you were one of the first people that I talked to about the idea because, we have, like you said, we have a long friendship and a lot of it is grounded in political work. And you're one of the people that I talk to about what's happening in the world and what we should do.
You're not going to admit that we ice skate together?
I still plan on getting you on the Aikido mat, by the way.
Okay, well, that would be interesting.
So basically what happened is, I when Trump got elected again, I remembered how the last time he got elected, there was huge mobilizations. Remember that? There were protests all over the country, huge mobilizations in all the major cities and elsewhere. And I was part of the effort in Boston to turn people out into the streets. And we did. We had tens of thousands of people out. We had a people's inauguration, and it was January in Boston. And it was a really wonderful, amazing event. But it kind of left you with this sense, which often happens after a mass mobilization, what are people going to do now? We all showed up for this. We all showed up on the Boston Common with the pink hats, and that was a major, major protest that was so crowded on the Boston Common, you couldn't even move. And you got stuck in there and you could not get out. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like that. So incredible mobilizations. But this big question that we were all left with is, now what are people going to do? And how can people find a way to connect with grassroots organizing so that they can put all this newly mobilized energy to work in a way that is connecting with others, where they're trying to solve problems on the ground, where they're trying to conceive of non-reformist reforms or to fight for reforms in a way that furthers long-term change, how to be with others in different contexts where you might make mistakes, you might fall flat on your face, you practice getting up and starting over again and reflecting on what happened and trying something new. All those muscles that we all need to be exercising all the time to really come up with strategies that will confront capitalism and white supremacy and the heteropatriarchy, which is, they're no small enemies. We really need all of us super engaged and super collectivizing our wisdom and our problem-solving abilities. So the idea was, why don't we come up with a directory? And of course, I feel like I tried to do my due diligence. Well, does a directory already exist like this? Maybe it's already there. Why reinvent the wheel? But, I really couldn't find anything that was useful, that wasn't aged, that hadn't kind of aged out. And also, I couldn't really find anything that was searchable in the way that I wanted it to be searchable. And then I also tried Googling it. Like, what if I was just random activist, say in Boston or some other community, and I'm very moved by what's happening to immigrants right now, let's say. What if I Google, how do I get involved in this? You end up going down a lot of internet rabbit holes, and a lot of them are very informed by AI now, and AI kind of is the top thing in the top of your search list. And it tells you, here's how you get involved. You can donate money to the ACLU. You can write a letter to your congressperson. these kinds of activities that are good things to do, but they don't have that ingredient that I was looking for, which is the connection with others, the experience of being in a collective of people that's trying to solve a problem, where you really get to use your mind along with other people's minds together and be in that process together. So we started talking about it with other people. We pulled together a group of conveners and kind of started thinking about what this thing should look and feel like. And we've evolved now about 6 months later, where we have a really solid database. We've got hundreds of organizations listed in there. And we have a way for people to just go in there and search based on their location, the type of issue that they're interested in, or the type of work they want to do. So you might have people who say, well, I'm interested in a lot of issues. I could work on anything from climate change to immigrant justice to housing justice, but I have this one skill set that I really want to deploy. So I'm just going to search for who's looking for my skill set. And you can search by that. So it's kind of a great way for people to match up with an organization that could work for them.
So this exists, correct? It exists at allofusdirectory.org, and it works. And so a person can use it. I wonder, what have been the difficult aspects of making this happen successfully? What are the issues that you've encountered in the process of doing it?
Well, let's just back up from the word successfully. I don't know. I don't know if it's even been successful yet. It's there. We're still trying to build it out. We haven't really widely publicized it to users, although we're getting close to doing that. We didn't want to publicize it to users until we felt sure that it was useful, because we don't want people to come to it and go, this isn't very useful. It doesn't have my community in it. It doesn't have very many organizations from my state, or, so we wanted to make sure it was really fully fleshed out. So we're still in the process of doing that. And I would say that the biggest challenges are, and not necessarily in order of priority, but they include a lot of organizations that are doing really good work actually aren't equipped to take in new volunteers very readily. They might be equipped to take in a couple. They might not be equipped to take in a major influx. And so they have a hesitation about listing themselves in the directory because they wouldn't be able to absorb an influx. I think, sometimes it's interesting. It goes to what's happening in our nonprofits and in our social justice organizations. Are they really poised to do base building and to get larger and larger and larger? Or are they more poised to kind of stay the same? And, it's kind of a criticism / not criticism of nonprofits. I don't blame them because, I know they're working hard to raise the money to keep themselves going and to keep doing the mission that they've laid out for themselves. But at the same time, in my experience with a lot of nonprofits, is that they end up kind of getting to this point of stasis where, they actually kind of can't keep growing, and they have moved a little bit away from a base building mission. Anyway, just to say, I think organizations need help figuring out how to integrate large numbers of volunteers. And it's not nothing, to bring in volunteers and give them something useful to do. That is not nothing. That is a large load of work. You need to be able to engage people. You need to be able to use their skills. You need to be able to have a place for their voices. Sometimes people come into organizations pretty unskillfully. They come in kind of knowing it all or having an agenda and not being able to perceive what is the agenda of this place. How can I get to know what this is before I kind of start asserting myself? So all these challenges happen when you bring in a lot of volunteers. So it takes a lot of work and skill. So I think, that's one of the challenges, is finding organizations that truly would embrace new volunteers. Another challenge is security. People are very, very concerned about being targeted as nonprofits by the Trump administration, losing their nonprofit status, not being able to accept tax-deductible donations anymore. And so they've stepped a little bit back or sideways from their mission to protect themselves. And they also feel nervous just having themselves listed somewhere on a database, even though they're already public facing and their website is fully up and available for anybody to find. It still feels, people have expressed nervousness about being listed on another database. So that's two. What am I forgetting, Michael? You've been involved with this as well.
I think those are the big ones that are contextual to now. There's also, I guess, the extent to which it's a version of what you said. People are preserving the present, their present,
Mm-hmm.
as compared to having it in mind to win change, to go forward. And that can be a mindset that exists even independent of Trump, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the repression thing, I think, is a function of, what's going on. Perhaps a bit too sensitive of a response to that. Because for one thing, it doesn't work. That is protecting yourself by doing what he wants or what the government wants doesn't ward off, a Trumpist drift. It abets it. So it proves to be harmful. And that's been a little frustrating. I've found it frustrating. You have a tremendous capacity for, what shall we say? I don't know, dealing with reality. Uh, so you manage it. I don't know what happens when you go home at night and start throwing things at the wall, but you manage it at least in the visible
Well, we did
circumstances.
reference the Aikido at the beginning. I put that
Right.
in my bio for a reason. I do go to the dojo and throw people around and get thrown around, for a solid hour and a half almost every night. So I think that's part of it.
That's true. I've never had that, and I probably maybe would have been helped by having that.
It
Um,
is. It is just to piggyback on something you just said, though. I mean, we are dealing with a lot of people that are very scared, that have a
yeah.
lot to lose, that can be targeted and truly victimized, in ways that we need to appreciate. And one thing I try to do is I just try to take things at face value. If somebody's telling me they don't have the capacity to do something, I try to just hear that for what it is. I don't know everything happening in their life or in their organization. I do, I'm famous for being stubborn and pushing back, and I do that a lot too. But I try to do it in a way that really expresses understanding. I mean, I've had some groups say they can't join the directory because they're a 501c3 and they have to appear nonpartisan. And I've kind of become a student of this, and actually, in fact, as in the 501c3, the way you express nonpartisanship is you can't support a certain party and you can't support a certain candidate. But Trump is no longer a candidate. Trump is an elected official, and we absolutely can and should be able to raise our voices against, him and what he's doing. But people, like I said, they're just scared, and they probably wouldn't be a good match for the directory. So then in that case, we have to let that go.
There's another dimension of what you're saying, I think, which is that there's an inclination, I think, among lots of people to approach life and politics in particular, which is where it becomes an issue, individually, thinking about one's own circumstances, one's situation, and not with an eye on what's collectively possible. And I think that's making it difficult now too. It it seems to be almost everywhere, um, and the big demonstrations are undoing it a little bit. There's a feeling that something large can happen. Um, it's not that doing things with a small group is bad. It's just that not doing things that are large and increase our numbers is bad. Uh, I don't know whether you've
Yeah, I
encountered
mean,
that.
and that's why I think the All of Us directory is so important. If it gives people a chance to connect with others and see themselves not alone in this situation, but connected with people who are trying to do something about it. I mean, the most inspiring work I've ever done has been when I've been with other people and we've been able to experience solidarity together. And, this has come for me in my life when I've done a lot of housing justice work. We organize tenant associations, which is sort of like a union of tenants in a building. And they go from being completely alone with their individual problem with the landlord, which they've all their lives have been instructed that the way you solve this problem is by individually trying to going to the landlord. And basically your position is to beg,
Yeah.
to beg. And you have no power and you're just appealing. And to shift that to a position of power because you've organized yourselves into a union of other tenants, and now the whole union of tenants is going to the landlord and saying, we're not okay with this. And to have that shift from individual to collective power is the most powerful, inspiring thing I've ever, been part of. And it's been on for me, it's been on a kind of a small scale, building by building, in this case, and, apartment buildings in Boston. But what I see happen is, first of all, the tenants discover the meaning of solidarity. It's something that we do not get to experience in our culture very often. So just giving people that experience of solidarity is life-changing. Then what happens is all these other changes start to happen in the apartment building. Now they know each other. Now they've been in struggle together. Now they've done scary things together. At first people are scared to even come to a meeting. What if the landlord finds out I came to this meeting? Then they start getting into their power and they start becoming fighters. And then they also start doing things like, oh, your kid goes to that school, so does mine. Let's share, commuting to the school, or let's do after school daycare together, or let's just help each other out in various ways. So that starts to happen. And then people also start to really develop their consciousness. Like there was one woman leader at one of the buildings I was working at who allowed the father of her child to come and live with her, even though he was not a good presence in the home, but he was at risk of being homeless, and she didn't want, her kid's dad to be on the street. So she let him live there, and he started dealing drugs out of the building. And the other tenants were furious with her. I mean, she allowed a drug dealer into their home environment where their kids pass by every day, and it's dangerous. And they were really furious with her. And the landlord found out, and the landlord tried to evict her. And you might say in this case, he had good cause. I mean, she had broken the law, and this was an endangerment to the whole community. And so he wanted to evict her. But the tenants really, they got together. They had this big meeting, which I was privileged to be at. She explained her situation. She made a really authentic and genuine apology. She told her plan for how to not have him be around anymore. It was an incredibly genuine thing. People were crying. People turned their attitude towards her a little bit. And also she had been a leader of this tenant association. So they were also grateful to her for her leadership. And, just all these pieces kind of came together. And then when the landlord came to say, she has to be evicted, it's non-negotiable, every single person in that group said, you'll have to come through me. You want to get rid of her, you're coming through me. And that landlord had to walk away with his tail between his legs. I mean, he could not confront the power of organized tenants, even though he had a legal right to, and even though all the things. So seeing that happen is what I want for everybody to see and experience over and over and over again, because then you start to be able to grow from that. And you get to this point where you feel like, oh, why should we have a society where the banks are running everything and the billionaires are controlling? And why should we have a society where bosses, get to tell me what to do all day and make me feel like shit all day? Why should we have this? And you've had the experience that a group of people can be powerful enough to, even though you don't have the law on your side, you don't have normal practice or cultural norms on your side. But all you have on your side is basically kind of a moral authority that this is wrong. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's what moves me about the directory, is it gives us a chance to connect people.
But before you get there, I think you have a feeling of moral authority on the other side. I don't know what it is. So take one of these law firms, right? There's, I don't know, 50 partners, let's say, and 3,000 lawyers. And these 3,000 lawyers, they're not downtrodden folks, even the young ones who still have their, their desires. They're not downtrodden. And yet these 50 guys go off and say, okay, we're going to bow down to Trump. The thing that shocks me is not that. It's that the 3,000 don't do anything about it. They hate it, most of them, right? Same thing at the university. When the Columbia trustees said, okay, we'll compromise with you, Donald, why didn't the campus erupt? And I think it has to do with what you're describing. It's a habitual cultural pattern of functioning separately. And you can't even sort of dream about it. Doesn't come up. It's not that it's rejected. The 3,000 lawyers don't reject fighting together.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come up. It's just, it's foreign. And then it's overcome by what you describe.
It's not in our vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's really not. And when I did the housing organizing, I would notice that you could really talk to people about, this isn't right what the landlord's doing. He's using your home and your community as an investment opportunity. How is that okay? How is it okay that all communities are getting gutted by these real estate investors? And they would be completely on board, but then sometimes, they would go back to the old framework, which is, but everybody has a right to make a profit and they can't help it. They spent $4 million on the building. They got to make their mortgage payment and it's not their fault. They have a right to make, but this is America. So you would fall back onto the dominant narrative, which is that. And our narrative has to work really hard to make itself heard, and not just heard once, but over and over and over again, so that people can grab hold of it. I think what you're describing in nonprofits is really interesting. I think, or you're talking about law firms, but I think in nonprofits, it's also true. I mean, in some of the large nonprofits right now, they're rolling back a lot of their DEI work. In one that I know about, everybody was recently told, even though they had been told a few years ago, here's your new email signature. Make sure you put your pronouns, in the email signature. And then there's a little link to, what does it mean that I'm sharing my pronouns? And it's kind of this, thing that some people may have mixed feelings about, but in the idea of it is
that there. Yeah.
And the idea is that, people who are genderqueer get to have visibility, and right. The whole gender binary is something that is being contested, and that's a good thing. And an awareness about the breaking down of that binary is a good thing. And so putting your pronouns in your email signature, I don't know, it contributes to visibility. But now comes the directive, take those pronouns out of your email signature because we don't want to look like some kind of way to our funders and to the federal government. And everybody goes, oh, this is terrible. This is bad. We're bowing to authority. We're obeying in advance. But we just have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So then they just do it. But what's missing from so many contexts in our lives is an organizing model. Let's just call it that. And the organizing model is what I was describing, where people think of themselves as a collective, not as individuals. And I think that that's one of our biggest challenges as leftists, is being aware of how much the narrative is controlled by the other side and how much work we have to do to get our language in there and our concepts in there. I've taught English as a second language in a number of different workplace environments. And in the non-union hotel where I taught, all the workers are called teammates. And if they have a problem, they're invited to come to HR and talk it through. Where's that going to get anybody? And I mean, and even if you do get something that you go to HR to kind of ask for or beg for, and say you actually get it, there's a cost, and usually the cost is you get bought in to the institution more. Maybe you get promoted to like a low-level manager where now you enforce all these micro rules on workers, but maybe you make a little bit more money, but now you're an enforcer and you're that much farther away from any kind of class consciousness. So that's how it works in a non-union hotel. And in the union environments that I worked in, you would never go talk to HR by yourself. You would, you have a union steward at your side and you have the backing of the whole union with you. And you have been maybe at the negotiating table with the employer where you see yourself as people bargaining and fighting and using your power against each other to try to get the best possible deal for your side. And that's just a whole different mindset that I think we need to be finding more and more ways. I mean, obviously the workplace, we need to be doing that, building unions, but also in our communities, having more tenant associations like the kind I was describing. There could be more kinds of associations for immigrants. There already are worker centers, but we need to keep looking for these ways that will help people have a solidarity model for how to fix a problem.
The immigrant situation is almost exactly analogous to your housing situation, it seems to me. But there's another problem, or there's another obstacle, I suppose you could call it, that's different from variance on being afraid and trying not to be repressed, which is simply, I guess you could call it defeatism. What do you say to someone who says it's hopeless? Trump won. Fascism is our future. I'm hunkering down not because I'm not collective, but because that's the only thing left to do. And have you encountered that? And when you do encounter it, do you have a way to get any place with it? It's not easy.
It's definitely not easy. I don't know too many people who are willing to just completely hunker down and not pay attention. And what I often think about is something that happened to me and my partner Paul a number of years ago when we witnessed a shooting in our city. And what happened is when we got to the area where the shooting had happened, it turned out it was a police shooting. They had shot into a bus. We didn't understand the whole situation at that time, but what we did see was that there was a bus. It was full of bullet holes, and there was a young African-American man in the back of an ambulance, which you could see through the window, and that the EMTs were doing CPR on this young man. And also the strange thing was that the ambulance wasn't moving. Now, obviously, if you're doing CPR on somebody, this is a life and death situation. The ambulance should be getting to the hospital as soon as possible. Why wasn't the ambulance moving? It was surrounded by police cars.
So they wouldn't let it move.
Well, what did I do? I went berserk. Well, I started off not going berserk, but I started off trying to be rational and calm. And I said to a police officer, hey, can you move that car? It's blocking the ambulance and there's somebody in there getting CPR. So he needs to get to the hospital. And I can't even believe these words are coming out of my mouth, but I'm just having to say them.
Yeah.
He said, oh, I don't know whose car that is. And I'm like, okay, how hard would it be to find out whose car? Why am I problem solving?
This is a police car, right? Yeah.
He didn't know there was many police. There was a huge police action. He didn't know which officer had driven that car. So therefore who had the keys. So therefore who could move it. So, I got going. You can imagine I'm so mad. I'm just shaking. I'm coming up with more and more ideas like, okay, well, we just simply can break the window and put it in neutral and roll the fucking thing away. I don't know. But there's a million solutions that we could do here. And pretty soon I have a circle of cops around me. I'm basically yelling at them and they're treating me like a crazy lady. And Paul comes up to me and grabs me by the collar and just pulls me out of the circle. And he says, you're just going to get yourself arrested. Like, stop. You're going to get yourself arrested. I was like, well, we have to do something. And he said, well, we can move this car. There was a civilian car that was parked that was also part of the blockage. And he said, what we can do is if we get enough people, we can pick this car up and put it on the sidewalk. And then the ambulance will be able to go. I didn't know you could pick up cars.
Really, I'm going to say.
I didn't.
A different out-of-the-box thought. What? Yeah. Pick up a car?
I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, right. I don't know. Just and what I was doing.
But it worked?
So it worked. So we got about 20 people, and sure enough, man, 20 people can pick up a car. All you have to do is go 1, 2, 3, lift, and then everybody scooch it over, and then we just put it down on the sidewalk. The minute we got that car out of the way, the ambulance drove away.
Yeah.
So when I think about this story, I think about, first of all, just completely heartbroken that happened, and then young man ended up dying. And I also just have to look at myself in that situation. I don't blame myself for going berserk and for being really angry. But what was I doing? I was privately yelling and shaking my fist at a wall of authority with guns and uniforms who did not have to listen to me at all. But the only thing I was doing was I was continuing, and then I was yelling louder and shaking my fist hard. I mean, it was not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And Paul had a complete, so this is why I'm telling this story, because I feel like, there's value in a lot of our minds. There's value in all of us being able to think together about things. And there's value in the sort of moral outrage that I was expressing, because maybe that's what kicked Paul into even thinking about, we can pick up a car. There's a value in all of it, but we needed the 20 people to pick up the car and move it. And so what I want to say to people who are feeling really defeatist is, okay, you're going to be witnessing this kind of thing. I mean, and let's face it, we already are. Trump is not introducing gangster capitalism and barbarism to our daily lives. These things already existed. Immigrants have already been treated as if they have no rights. Mass incarceration's already, none of, we've had decades and decades of horrible, illegal, unethical, and horrible wars. None of this is new. Trump has just taken it to a new level. But do you really want to be in a position where you're seeing this happen, whether it's right in front of you, like the story I just told, or whether it's a couple notches more distant, and not do anything? Wouldn't it feel better to be connected with others where you're trying to think about, oh, maybe we can pick up the car and move it over? I think that that makes a big difference for our, in a selfish way, even our own mental health. This isn't about being selfless and altruistic. This is about my community. I live in this community. Is this what police are doing to people in my community? Including whether it's the housing or the police or the immigrant rights. I don't want to live in a world like this where I see these things happening and not being able to do anything about it.
I wish that approach would work all the time. I don't think it would. Because if the person is thinking in terms of their self-situation, stop yelling at the cops. You don't want to get arrested. Don't try and pick up the car. They'll hit you with a baton. Go have lunch. You do need a degree of what you obviously felt, which is caring about the other person, not just yourself. And that really is a mindset that is, it's not easy to generate. It's because it's been wiped out of us. It's not because it's not natural to us to care about others. It's because, we live in a world in which caring about others is a good way to not get ahead, and not caring about others is a good way to get ahead. Mm-hmm.
There are some social contexts where caring is promoted and where people really do care and show care for others. And I think it's very human to care.
Yeah.
We all see it all the time. It's just that we have to find ways to amplify it in a political way.
Yeah.
I think, I think I told you about the time that my friend Andy and I were on the UAW picket line in, I can't remember what the name of the community south of Boston here, when there was big coordinated strikes of UAW.
Go ahead.
So we went down to this UAW picket line, and we ended up having a great conversation with this guy who was an electrical worker, had been in a union, and he was retired now, but he was just out supporting the UAW. And he was so great to talk to. He was so political. Had such a sharp analysis of the billionaire class and what they were doing and how they were trying to undermine unions. And we had this great conversation. And I said, well, inside, I said to myself, let me take this a little further and see where he would go with this if I ask him, what do you think this country needs? What do you think we should do? And, I was kind of waiting for him to say, we need democratic socialism. Guess what he said? Incredibly disappointing response. He said, well, we got to do something about the welfare queens, and we got to, get these immigrants out of here. I'm sick and tired when I call, when I make a call and I go through the voice tree, it says, press 1 if you want English and press 2 if you want Spanish. I'm tired of pressing 1 for English.
I remember you telling me this story, and I was much affected by it and wrote about it a few times.
That was, that was what he could come up with, as a strategy. And, Andy said to him, well, the powers that be couldn't be happier that you're punching down. That's called punching down.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, I know what you're going to say. They love to divide us, and that's true. That's how they make us weaker. He even knew that much. And still, the narrative, we can't underestimate the power of propaganda.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And habit. And
mm-hmm.
I think I told you once about the story about I was teaching in prison. It was a medium security prison. And I was teaching these classes, and they were very radical. And I go to lunch, and I sit down at a table, and you could do that. And everybody at the table was black and me. And then there were other tables that were all white. And I said to people, we just finished in class talking about how this is a very effective means of maintaining order and keeping people down. And the guy said, yeah, I know, because he did know, right? And I said, well, then why aren't you over there? And he said, why are you over here? Which was pretty astute. He said, would you want to sit over there? And I shut up after that. But so the surrounding situation makes the behavior that is self-harmful rational. And it makes it in the short run, in some sense, more rewarding, more fulfilling. As in, don't get arrested, don't spend time in jail, don't, et cetera, et cetera. Short run, it has a payoff. I guess we'll see how things develop. I have a tendency to think that your example of the tenants are going to be the people, that set of people, working people, people who have endured circumstances, who are going to, at some point in this whole scenario, be what matters almost exclusively in the resistance. Not exclusively, but almost exclusively. Our role is going to sink, and their role is going to climb. And it's because they will be more flexible about what to do and less anal about being perfectly correct and various other things that,
right. Well, there's some.
It hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, there's some flexibility that we have to have between allowing, things need to emerge. I mean, I think partly what you're talking about is, there's been decades now of this kind of nonprofit industrial complex kind of dominating our social justice movements. And I'm not sure it's been a good thing. Sometimes we even find that the nonprofit is replicating norms of capitalism. And the workers in the nonprofit don't think of themselves as workers. And so they also don't bring the organizing model into their workplace. They're using the organizing model maybe outside their workplace, but they should maybe bring it inside their workplace too. But we need to be flexible with allowing for new movement moments to emerge, and accepting that they might be problematic in different ways, but that we need to kind of have a really big tent set of options that are being allowed to grow and get their feet under them and try to learn. And then we also need to connect with the wisdom of the organizers that have been around for a long time, because we do know some things. Like, we've done this for a long time. We've learned some lessons. There's ways that we should be connected to keep moving things forward. I just went to a training recently for I think it was called Ice Watch, and it was about verifying and documenting ICE in the neighborhood. And so it's not a direct action at this point, but I'm really impressed by the organizers in Massachusetts who have set up a hotline. It's called the Luce Hotline, LUCE hotline. And they're training people in all these communities. And when people at my training, there was almost 100 people there. And they're learning how to, if there's a rumor that ICE is in the neighborhood, then you should go and verify if it truly is ICE and put it out on a signal thread so word can get out that, yes, it really is ICE, or no, it's not ICE. It's just, the transportation police or something, which they in Massachusetts, they don't do immigration detention. I just found out from my brother in Florida that the police in Florida are deputized to do immigration enforcement. So you have to be really careful in a place like Florida. But in Massachusetts, if it's just the regular police, that's not a danger to immigrants as much as it would be if it was immigration. So anyway, this training was very good, but it was also had a kind of a modest level to it. We're not trying to intervene on the detention. We are just trying to document it and verify. And I think the door is open for, as we get more training, as people get more skilled, as the stakes get higher, it could evolve into a direct action. If we had 100 people there and ICE was detaining somebody, maybe we could put our bodies in the way.
Right.
But that's a step that we could grow into as this organizing gets legs under it. But if we went straight to that step, that would not be good. That would just probably yield people getting injured, people getting arrested, and it would probably cut the movement off at its knees. But if we grow carefully and with training, then we could be poised to do that. And I love that is a direction that we could be going.
Yeah. I hesitate to, way back when, exactly the dynamics that you're describing and concerned about the possibility of were real, were happening. And there were groups on the left who, intervene now, block now, put your life on the line now, et cetera, et cetera. The problem was that a large number of people in those groups ran and left everybody else to get hit by the cops because they knew what they were doing and they knew what was coming. And I kid you not, this was a common phenomenon. Well, we can't get arrested because we're too important. So we'll get out of here and you guys can deal with what's coming. And obviously that doesn't create a movement that has people who care about each other and who,
So anyway. You just gave a great example of how our organizing has evolved.
Yeah. Well, and yes.
That's good. I think we have a lot to be hopeful about, partly because of that. Our organizing, has evolved in some good ways and in some ways maybe not so good. But I really I am able to appreciate that doesn't go in a linear fashion, that things kind of go well for a certain amount of time and then they backtrack. I mean, one example of this, I think, is, there's really good attention to racism and sexism in our movements, almost to the point of it backfiring. By that, I mean people getting canceled because they made a mistake. And we have to have movements and organizations and organizing context where white people, men, cis men, people can make mistakes and they can get called in, called out, whatever you want to call it, and that there's space for them to continue. And I have one example that I would like to share of this happening where I did a really stupid, I want to say rookie move, really rookie, stupid, racist move, or, worst case scenario, maybe egregious, really ignorant racist move. But a bunch of us had been arrested and we were in a jail in South Boston. And we were getting released in small numbers, like little by little, they'd get 2 would get released and then 3 would get released. And there was a really small jail and, and there was a lot of us who got arrested. And the police officer said to me, go ahead and start ferrying your people to wherever they were going, as each set comes out, and then you'll come back and you can take the next batch. And, so this white cop tells me this and I go, okay, good idea. And agree that, and of course it was white people who got released first and black people who were still in jail, and agreed to this setup, which was a very ignorant thing to agree to. We should have all waited for everybody to get released to make sure the people of color were safe, and released in a timely fashion. And then we should have all left together.
Right.
And anyway, this was in the context of my housing justice work. And so I'd been on the front lines with people a lot. The people see me, they saw my blood, sweat, and tears. They knew that I was somebody who kept showing up. So I had that, but I broke a lot of trust by doing this. And one of the women, I'll never forget, she came up to me at our next meeting and she just dressed me down. And I deserved it, she really got it out of her system. She yelled at me. I told her that I was so sorry, that it was a really bad mistake, and that I learned from it. It wouldn't happen again. And we hugged it out and we were done. And we were back to doing the work. And I think part of the reason we could do that is because we had real work that we were doing together.
Yeah.
And she even felt like, okay, I got to work with these racist, or maybe best case scenario, just ignorant white people. But okay, I have to be in coalition with these people because this is how we're going to maybe win. And she had enough evidence of that from lived experience that despite our flaws, we also throw down. And okay, and you can yell at them and they don't slink away and start crying and never come back, because they're so embarrassed. Oh my God, I made a mistake, So having the discipline well, first of all, the most important ingredient, I think, is having real work, a context of real work, that you're interacting in the context of real work. And so that when you make your mistakes in that context, it's easier to just have a process of repairing the harm and an authentic apology.
It's not just real work, I think. It's real work that you want to win, that you want to succeed on. So that, in other words, there's a necessary flexibility, et cetera. Sometimes people are doing real things, but they only care about the doing of the things, not the outcome, right? The demonstration that is well designed to put off the entire population of the country, but feels good to you, to you. And there, I think your formula won't work. But if the idea is to accomplish something, then it works.
Right. So just connecting that back to the All of Us directory.
Yeah, I was going to just do that.
This is what we want, right? We want people to find ways to do this kind of work. It's meaningful. It makes a difference. You get to see the difference. You get to notice how you might be able to do it better. You get to try new things. You get to fail. You get to think with other people. You get to reflect. I mean, but, I just also want to not make it sound like it's easy. I don't know if you remember that a long time ago, I wrote an article called Talking Back to Chomsky. Do you remember that? And
I wrote one called Debating the Young Chomsky.
Okay, so we have that in common. But this is back when you were doing ZNet and Z Magazine, and you were sending commentaries out to large numbers of people. And I wrote this thing because I was moved to do so because I had read yet another piece by Noam that you're very familiar with this dynamic. He has a brilliant analysis of how the system is working and how punishing it is. And you read through the brilliant analysis and you get to the end and there's nothing to do but maybe jump off a cliff, right? Like that's what it feels like. And remember, for our listeners who might not know this, Michael and I go way back. We worked at South End Press together, and I wrote a lot for Z Magazine. And of course, Noam wrote books for South End Press and for Z. And anyway, we would always tell Noam, look, you can't just write this 500-page tome and leave people with nothing. And so you'll notice at the end of a lot of South End Press books, there'll be one paragraph that says, oh, this isn't the end of the world. You can organize. So just simply go join an organization and do something. Even a kindergartner could tell you that.
That's the crucial thing. Right. Even a kindergartner could do it. Even there's nothing to it. Go do it.
So then, of course, now not only do you feel terrible about the horrors that the 500-page tome took you through, now you feel terrible because you're worse than a kindergartner because you can't figure it out and a kindergartner could. And so I felt, I read another one of those pieces where he had the random paragraph at the end. And, this is no shade on Noam. He's one of my favorite people in the entire universe. And but I wrote this thing called Talking Back to Chomsky. And I wrote out, really why it is hard on the ground to find an organizing home, to be in the organizing home long term, to suffer through all the permutations of what happens in those meetings that go on for hours, and then all the decisions that get made, and the fact that, let's say you even maybe block an eviction or something. What's on the menu to do tomorrow? Oh, block another eviction. And then the day after that, block another eviction. And it seems like I just be blocking evictions for my whole life. What am I doing this for? It's not leading to an actual change in how we do housing in this country. That's not totally true, but that's kind of what it feels like. So I wrote this thing and I sent it to you and I was like, what do you think about this as a commentary? And then a couple of hours later, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I don't want to go up against Noam. Like, that's the biggest mistake of my life. And I emailed you and I said, oh, I withdraw that thing. I don't want to do that. I can't do that. That was a mistake. And you said, too late. It's already gone out to several 100,000 people. And,
wasn't that many, but
well, I think it might have been at that time. You at least
I used to tell Noam that he was creating weathermen and depressives, so those are your two. The thing was that in the end, it wasn't true for Noam. I don't know why, but you remember at ZMI, all these people would come and they would all talk about what changed their life. And it was one of those fucking tomes that Noam wrote. So, but I still think that the criticism is valid because he could have propelled a little more visionary and strategic awareness. But it's definitely valid for a lot of people other than Noam.
But also we could have the idea that it's easy, to take this work on. It's really not. I just want to say, I sit in a lot of meetings in my life and, people bring a lot of personal challenges into meetings. It's hard to get anything done in meetings. People want to take the attention of the whole group to, air their personal issues. People don't have a lot of discipline, and so we all have to kind of keep learning to have more discipline. I mentioned, that Aikido helps me think about how to overthrow the white supremacist, heteropatriarchal, capitalist country that we're in. And honestly, I think probably the biggest thing that it gives me is just that reminder about discipline. It takes a lot of discipline to keep showing up, to keep trying to use your full mind, to solve problems, to see reality. And sometimes I think reality looks like something that would just be, a despair-based response is the only thing appropriate. But I don't actually think that's the whole reality. There's lots of things going on to draw hope from, including, some of the things I've talked about here today. And so part of seeing reality is not just seeing the despair part, but the other hopeful parts, which really are real. They are there. And we have to keep putting them forward and learning from them and reminding ourselves that humans are capable of that.
Not a lie. It's not a lie, and it's not exaggeration to say it's the worst of times, but it's also not a lie and not exaggeration to say it's the best of times. The potential is enormous, and it really is. And it's not up to somebody else. That's another problem that exists. The inclination to say, okay, someone else solve it, and I'll do what I'm told. There's a shitload of that around also, which is a problem. I wonder, since we were talking about all of us, I don't know whether the people got an image of what's goes on. Organizations are in the directory. They have information in there. So if you go in the directory and you search and you find an organization, you find out about it, you find information about it, and you find out how to contact it and possibly join or volunteer. And use your search in the various ways you described. And for myself, I feel like there's an additional possibility. Maybe it's a long shot. That this project succeeding, which, as you say, it hasn't done yet, but with this project succeeding, could contribute to. And that's on the organization side of the coin, the organization's realizing that collectivity is the only way to go forward. So it isn't just the collectivity of the organization, but among them, overcoming the sort of atomistic approach to issues, et cetera. Not by eliminating each one, but by their working together and coordinating. And I've felt like maybe that could be spurred by the project. And then I've also wondered, well, why should this be only in the United States? Isn't it likely? I don't know, but isn't it likely that in other countries, the same things that are hard here are hard there, and the same absence of a mechanism to facilitate getting together? And so maybe, a spreading of the thing. Do either of these, well, I know they do, do these resonate with you at all?
Yeah, we can keep up with this conceit of you asking me questions that you already know the answer to. That's fine.
Can't help
that. Yeah, definitely. When I first even had this vision of this directory, I thought, okay, we'll have this directory populated by Inauguration Day, and then all the big protests that happen around inauguration, we'll have, the URL for our directory publicized all over the country. And, that was the timeline I was on. And then by summer, we'll have a mass meeting of all the organizations that are part of the directory. And I remember telling you that idea, and you said, "Oh, but by summer it might be too late."
Right. Your timeline was fast. Mine was even considerably faster. I was afraid.
And then we had Leslie Kagan, very experienced organizer with many decades under her belt, telling us that none of these timelines is going to work. There's no way this is going to be ready by Inauguration Day. And she turned out to be right. So, because the fact of the matter is it just takes a long time to do things.
It's true.
Yeah, I would love to have some kind of opportunity for organizations to get together, especially base building organizations that are out there on the front lines trying to, use an organizing model to galvanize people to make change in some way in their lives, right close to home, but in a way that addresses the social ills, right? Because that's what we're all after. We're after, fighting for reforms that help us further a longer term systemic agenda. And
so it's not just that it means something and it'll help us. It's that it resonates widely. Um, and that's where the organizations working together, I think, comes in.
yeah,
So it's one thing to have a great housing organization in the Boston area with people like yourself. It's another thing if that is echoing, across the country. Um, and if imagine that your fight in Boston is backed by the organization in New York and Chicago, et cetera, um, who threaten local, solidarity strikes. And imagine the same thing for what's going on. It's really hard to watch. What's his name, Musk, um, eradicate jobs and fire people, and the response is from many, not all, but a significant part of the response is to figure out where to apply for a job next. Um, as compared to everybody saying, "No, you can't fire us. Who the fuck are you?"
right.
Right? We're not going anyplace. We're not leaving. We're going to continue working. You just keep making your noises. And he says, "I'll call the police. Call the police. Go right ahead. Right? Let's
Mhm.
see what happens when they come in and there are 10,000 of us." Um, so, but it doesn't come in. And this goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's foreign.
And it's,
Um,
it's not, it's a, we want not just the housing organizations, which, they do have right to the city, and they have these national coalitions,
yeah,
Homes for All. They have some of those networks, but then the next step is, of course, the housing networks to align with the immigrant justice networks, to align with the reproductive justice net. We need people to be able to have the discipline to create agendas together,
yeah,
and to maybe not win or have their priority be at the top of the agenda,
yeah.
and to still have the discipline to know that collectively having an agenda is more powerful than having my particular priority at the top of the agenda.
Right.
Now, this is hard because racism and sexism and these things are real, and they permeate our meetings and our organizations, and we need to so we have to be able to be cognizant of that as well as keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, we're a little over an hour. Um,
I have one other little story that I want to share with you, just to
okay.
end things. One time when I came to visit you and Lydia in Woods Hole, we went out in the kayaks, and you had that protected little mill pond or whatever it was called right off your house, and we paddled around in there with no risk, but we exited that little protected area and went out into the ocean. Or we were hugging the shore. We weren't being daredevils, but we somehow got caught in a current that was going to sweep us out to the big ocean. And I didn't even notice, but you noticed. I mean, you were familiar, and you paddled out of the current, and you said to me, "Paddle as if your life depends on it."
I don't
And
remember this, but it's very possible. Yeah.
so I tried. I mean, I paddled harder. I wanted to get out of this current that was clearly sweeping me away, and you were kind of outside of it, kind of trying to stay nearby and within yelling distance. And I said, "I'm not getting out. Like, what am I doing wrong?" And you said, "You're not paddling as if your life depends on it."
Did I really?
Yeah,
Did you get out?
I got it.
Are
Yeah,
you
well,
are you still there?
here I am. And I
uh,
don't know if I hadn't gotten out. I asked you, I said, "What if I hadn't gotten out?" And you said, "Well, you would have been swept out to sea. And, what if, it was kind of unknown. Like, would we have made it back in time for lunch? Maybe not. How many hours would it have gotten dark before we got back? I don't know.
no.
It was a little bit of an unknown, but that little moment has kind of stayed with me, because I feel like we're in a life and death moment, and we have been for as long as I've been cognizant. it's a life and death moment for many people. Maybe not for my personal demographic at all times, but for so many people. And I want to paddle as if my life and other people's lives depend on it. But I want to do it in conjunction with, my comrades and my people, and be able to be kind of fed by the movements at the same time that I give, to them. So, and that's what I want for all of us, so that's the name of our directory. All of us. That's a good way to end.
Except there's a mistake, because it's capital U, capital S, and that might not have been wise. So we're going to have to change that, since nobody notices it anyway.
It's what you call a double entendre, Michael, and I'm okay with the double entendre. It's
but what about all of Great Britain?
Well, they'll have to have their own name, I guess.
But then now we have 50 names, and instead of one big thing, right?
Maybe they could call themselves all of GB, Great Britain. Yeah. Well, that's for them to figure out. We got our own problems in front of us, which are legion.
We do have a few.
Anyway, I'm happy to be connected with you while we try to work on them, and all the many thousands and thousands of other people that are really throwing their shoulder to the wheel. And
it's and I do think that it may well prove to be the case, and this is not a compliment to our last 30 or 40 years, that the people who've gone through that are not going to be the center of the really surging resistance that actually stops Trump. We'll help it along, and we need to do that. I mean, what I'm thinking about now, and let me ask you this to stop, so you don't get to ask the question. I don't know whether you saw the speech by the governor of Illinois.
Pritzker.
Mm-hmm. Just in the last couple of days. Call to arms, basically. I mean, it was more aggressive and militant in some ways than almost anything I've seen from the left. So you've got him, and you've got Sanders and AOC going around and, putting forward positive program. And the question arises, okay, insofar as all of us is helping new people find organizations, great. But what are the people like you and like me and like others contribute to the resistance, other than either criticizing the governor of Illinois and Sanders and AOC, which is not just a waste of time but counterproductive, or repeating what they're saying? What do we do that adds something to what is quickly outpacing our initial organizing and prodding of resistance? Because at the start, it was a lot of people who, were organizing and prodding it, but now it's not. It's people on campuses who have no prior political experience are going more and more aggressively, etc. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm not sure.
Would it be okay if we end this interview by me just saying, I don't know?
Well, I say it all the time, so that's yes, I think that is a fair thing to do.
I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I think we have to find where we can be useful, and we have to do it humbly and not acting like we know it all, because we certainly don't. But there's
a lot of evidence of that.
That's right. That's right.
That it doesn't require humbleness. It's evident.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. On that note, thank you for doing this. I think it was excellent. And I guess that said, this is Mike Albert signing off until next time for Revolution Z.